Here's a quick tutorial to create a stop motion armature using aluminum art wire. I wanted to go over some of the tools and materials you might need for this process. We're going to start, of course, with the art wire itself. You're going to need several thicknesses, starting with probably 1/8 inch going down to 1/16. We will talk about sizes and all that later on. You're going to definitely need a pair of needle nose pliers with a wire cutter and a pair of scissors. You're going to need these two things. They're called T-nuts. You want 2 of those. Those are going to be for the feet. You will need a little bit of contact cement. Here is some Weldwood contact cement. You'll need some thread. And you will need this epoxy called JB Weld. Or you could use Quick Weld, or JB Quick it's called, and that's a 2-part epoxy. You'll need a stir stick and something to put the epoxy in, which we'll do later on. And that's just the kind of bare bones of what you might need. If you want to get a little fancier, you can get some nicer wire cutters or a wire straightener, which you'll kind of see how I might need that during this process. Okay, on with the tutorial. Okay, to start, we're going to start with a drawing. I have a character drawing here done by a friend of mine. It's very simple, very quick. And this becomes the blueprint that will be used to make the armature, to make sure that the armature stays within the confines of the character that you've designed. Okay, we're going to start with the thickest kind of wire, and we want to use thicker wire from below the waist and thinner wire from above the waist. We never use just one wire. We use groups of 4 wires so that they become backups for each other in case they break. All right, so what we're going to start with is we're going to start with the wire starting at the spine right here, and it's going to go down and come down past this foot, going to go up, across, back down. I'll go over this again, and you're going to end up here again. So we're going to start with the wire. So this is the thicker wire. You're going to make sure it's nice and smooth and clean with no breaks in it. I try not to use my any tools while I'm dealing with the wire, especially around the ankles, knees, and hips. So we start with really straight lines. So we're going to have this bend for the spine, and then you can see we take nice right angles for keeping this wire straight. And now we're going to go right past the foot, because here's the toe of the foot. So we're imagining that his leg is fully extended, so that becomes the tip of the toe. Now I know I'm going to mark it just with my fingernail, and I'm going to bend it around like so. And I'm going to try not to overwork the wire. I'm going to keep it straight and not try to make it all wonky, because we want to keep it in a straight line, and we want to not bend it up as much as little as possible so that it has a longer life. Aluminum art wire has a tendency to break eventually because it gets brittle from being bent over and over. And if you do it less and less while you're creating your puppet, then you'll have more times to animate that puppet inside and in front of the camera. So now I've got the one leg done. Now I just have to mirror it. So I'm going to bring the leg down like this, and I'm going to flip it back up. I'm going to cut this wire just to make it a little bit easier to deal with. So you can see that I'm always checking to make sure that it fits within the confines of that design. And then I'm going to come up like so and bend it like that. I'm going to try not to do all these crazy bends, but sometimes you have to wrestle with it a little bit. So just like a cooking show, I made this earlier, and I'm going to jump right to it. So this is the lower half. These are the legs. This is the spine. You can see everything's nice and straight. We lay that right there. Now those are 2 wires. Okay, we got 2 wires for the legs. We got to remember that this has to support the entire weight of the puppet. So it's very important that you make these wires thick enough to be able to keep that weight up, depending on the scale of your character's head. Now, we don't stop at 2 wires. We're going to go all the way to 4 wires. So what I've done here is I have some thinner wire like this. This is about half the thickness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by measuring this out and start at the ankle. And I'm going to go across the hips, like so. Again, trying to keep everything straight. And I'm going to go across the hip over to the other leg and then back down. So what I'm doing now is I have not 2 wires, but 4 wires. I'm going to flatten this out so it's a little easier to see. Now you could do these as individual separate wires, or you can just fold it over like I just did. So you can see that this sits here and that sits there. Now you see this is a little bit long, so what I'm going to do is just trim it to make it match the other leg. I like using these sidebars, these clippers, because it makes a really clean cut, and it doesn't have too much of a sharp edge. You see, it's very nice and flat. So these are going to go here. Now that you have the main leg wires and the 2 backup wires, we're going to add the contact cement, and we're going to not put a lot on it, but we're going to make sure we brush all the surfaces on both sets of wires. Try to be as clean as you can so this stuff doesn't get anywhere, or everywhere I should say. So both sides. And this is going to give the thread something to grip onto, and it'll also allow the wires from the backup wires and the main leg wires to bond together, to laminate together, because we're building up this composite of a couple of different thicknesses of wire. Now contact cement has solvent in it, and so once you brush it on there, it's not completely sticky, but if you wait 60 seconds, it will be perfectly sticky and ready for the thread. It's been an actual minute, 60 seconds, and you can feel it's a little tackier now. So what I've done is I've pre-cut a piece of thread right here. Just grab your thread, pull out a nice length, and then double it over. Cut it with a scissors if you like. So what I've been doing lately is I've been just putting the loop of it right over and down the spine, just for a way to kind of get the initial attachment point. And now I'm going to start to wrap it. I'm going to start kind of loose just so I can get it started. So I kind of do some really broad loops all the way down to the end, and then I can go back and start doing it tighter and tighter. So another loop, and then wrap it. And you can see, even without the thread, if I just stick these together, these wires together, they just kind of cling to each other. And what's nice about that is that when these wires bend, it bends in not in one area, but in a bunch of areas, so it kind of bends softly, and it's less likely to have the wires break. Knees and ankles and wrists are the most common places for armatures to break. Okay, here are the legs fully wrapped. You can see it's not too dense, but it's very consistent all the way around. So this was 4 separate wires, but now when I go to bend that leg, it bends as one. And these wires here, because they're glued together and they have thread, they kind of move like this, more like the tendons of a leg kind of a thing. And now this kind of unifies the leg, and it's less likely to break, because once it's inside the armature, it's tough to get in there and do surgery. We're going to be doing the upper torso now. The difference between the bottom and the top is we're only going to be using 1 layer of this wire, and it's actually 3/16 aluminum art wire. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start at the wrist of this arm right here. You don't want to go all the way to the end of the hand, because we're going to be making an armature separately for the hands and adding those later. So we're going to imagine that this hand right here is, or this wire right here is the end of the wrist. And then we're going to go straight up here. We're going to go across to the shoulder. Okay, so when you're bending this, make sure you bend it at right angles and keep these wires straight so we're not kidding ourselves about how long these are. Also, don't have the armature wire go right to the edge of the drawing. It should be in the center of the drawing, because this will all be foam when we flesh our character out and put the costume on and all that. So we're going to go from the wrist to the shoulder to the center of the body, and then we're going to dive down all the way to about halfway through the body right there. Not past the midway point, about half of the body. And then we're going to reverse angles and go back up like so. Now, when you need these to be parallel, like the arms were, normally I just do everything by hand, but at some point, when you get down to the wire that's a little thicker, you're going to need to use a tool. Now, this is right down at the spine. It's not an area that's going to be moved a lot, so it's unlikely to snap, but I'll use a tool like this needle nose pliers to squeeze this together like so, to make sure that it's nice and parallel. We don't want to twist the wire. We want to keep them parallel right next to each other, because then they work better together, and it also helps prevent breakage. Okay, so we've got this arm, we've got the spine, and now we're going to go across here and end at the other wrist. And again, once again, like a cooking show, here's the finished product. Now, this was made before this drawing was made, so I'm going to trim these just a little bit to match my drawing. And this cuts nice and smooth right there, and it sits just like that. Now that the main wire for the arms are complete, we're going to do 2 wires that become the backup wires that go from the wrist over the shoulder and down to the other wrist. We want to go with a wire that's thinner than this wire, so we're going to hold it down to the wrist. We're going to bend it over like so, and bend it over like so. Now, this one is just a little long, so I'm going to trim it. And we're going to do that one more time. Now we're ready for some contact cement. You're going to carefully cover all the wires, just like I did with the legs. Avoid the spine for now, but you're going to go across the shoulders and down each arm on both sides, trying to make it completely coated without getting too sloppy. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing with these backup wires. We're going to make sure that they're completely covered. And then we're going to wait a full minute before we start wrapping it with thread. Okay, it's been a full 60 seconds. Now, what you want to do is you want to get some thread, cut it off, get a good length, and then fold it over. So I have a few pre-cut right here, so I just take a piece like that. You can see it's already sticking to my fingers. I usually start by doing a really quick wrap, and I think I probably mentioned this with the legs, starting up here and then just kind of lightly winding it around. This isn't permanent for now. This is just to kind of hold it in place. And then we'll move on to the other side. I put the loop right through the spine, and then I just start wrapping. And once you're done with this loose wrap, then you can go back and do a really refined tight wrapping where you're actually squeezing these wires together, and then you can start to wrap it nice and tight. So I'll finish that and we'll move on to the next step.